much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for including me in today's event. It's really inspirational. I wasn't aware of all the amazing work that you're doing, and you're really breaking a lot of ground and setting some great examples for people within Canada, but also around the world as we're trying, as Linda was saying, trying to rebuild our food system. So I'm delighted to be here, and I think my role, correct me if I'm wrong, is to do a little bit of myth busting and give you some context and maybe some of the rationales that you sense are out there, but you might not have the specifics around it. So I think my job for the next 15 minutes is to give you some of that rationale about the context that you're working in, and maybe a little bit of bigger picture context for why you're doing the work you're doing. So you may have a sense of the food system as being in great shape and there's really nothing we need to do to fix it. Or you may have this sense that things are very upside down, very disjointed, and there's actually quite a bit of work to do. And I think if you're working in the processing and distribution areas, which I understand is a focus for some people in the room, you've got this sense of what's going on in the food system. So what I'm going to do now is present what I call the four myths of the food system. And these are really focused on misconceptions that we may have about the food system and why we think we're doing things. And when we put them together in a coherent and sort of systems focus, they can help provide us with a rationale for having a different kind of food system than the globalized industrial food system that exists today. So I'm going to walk you through those, and then I'm going to talk about a little bit about some of the alternative financing options and the rationales for those that we might want to consider, that you might want to consider. So the first myth is the fact that there isn't, or there is apparently the fact that there isn't enough food to feed the world. In fact, there is enough food for more than 10 billion people. This is really well documented. And there's more than enough food for these people to eat a healthy diet. However, despite that, the world cannot afford a healthy diet. We have more than 3 billion people in the world who are malnourished in one way or another. In Canada, bringing it sort of home, these numbers home, at least 5.8 million people were living with food insecurity or had inadequate access to food in 2021. And another thing that's important to consider is when we're thinking about whether or not there's enough food in the world to feed everybody, is that we actually waste at least a third of the food that we produce. So we have enough food for everybody. And in addition to that, we waste a third of it. So we don't need to be producing more food. That is not our challenge. What we do need are food systems that can capture the benefits of regional economic and ecological cycles. So that idea of circularity, where everyone has access to affordable, healthy food. And to give you a sense as to where the work that I'm doing comes from in terms of healthy, sustainable food and what that looks like on a person's plate, I would point you to the Canada Food Guide, which is actually one of the better food guides around these days. So that's something we can be proud of and champion as Canadians. The second myth that I'd like to put out there for you is that multinational corporations can solve the food crisis, because it's well recognized that we have a food crisis. Despite the fact we have enough food, as I said before, many people unfortunately don't have access to healthy diets. So, however, when we consider the actual role of multinational corporations, they are increasingly dominating and compromising our food system. So if we look at the facts, the industrialized, globalizing food system contributes more than a third of greenhouse gases to climate change. It's the primary driver of biodiversity loss in the world. It uses more than 70% of fresh water that's available. And as I said before, it results in more than 3 billion people being malnourished. And as Linda had that great diagram about the corporate concentration that's happening in the globalized industrial food system, and this is something that's continuing. It's something that's getting more and more intense. And as it continues, communities, as we all know, lose control of their food systems. So the thing is, we don't need more large multinational corporations. What we do need are regional food systems that use local knowledge and indigenous crops that are suited to local growing conditions. That's on the production side. But we need to link those together through sustainable, scale appropriate food distribution and food processing with consumers. So this is a diagram that we produced as part of some work at the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, and it captures the intent of having a more circular, connected city-region food systems where we're where we're connecting the producers together with the consumers through local processing and distribution and marketing. It's also important to know, this is another bit of a myth that I'd like to put out there for you. And this paper was led by Irina Knezevich, who I believe is working with your group. So you might want to have that as part of the knowledge that you take away today. The point of this paper is that small and medium farms are are more productive on less land. So if we look at the amount of food that gets produced on small and medium-sized farms, they actually provide about 81% of the kilocalories or the energy that we get from food to people, but they only use 72% of the land that is cultivated in the world. Large farms, on the other hand, provide only 19% of the kilocalories, so of the energy that we get from food, and yet they use 28% of the land. So we can see that working with small-scale farmers and medium-sized farmers is a much better way, and supporting those is a much better way of keeping a more vibrant and sustainable kind of food system. Sorry, there we go. The third myth that I'd like to address is that the global food system allocates resources efficiently. As I said before, we waste more than 30% of the food produced. And this, in addition, we also overuse fossil fuels. So when we take those things combined, we're squandering energy, water, soil, and labor, all the things that get brought together to produce food. And one of the places that food can be squandered and wasted is outside the production. So once the food leaves the production, so leaves the farm, there are many opportunities for reducing food waste. And that is, those are some of the places where you folks come in terms of altering how we process food, what food's available. And even if you're working with farmers sort of around the ugly food movement, as it's been dubbed in some places, and working to get more of the food that's produced into food processing, that's also a really great way of reducing waste. The other thing that I'd like to point out to you is that fossil fuel dependence in Canada is increasing. So our food system is becoming increasingly dependent on fossil fuels based on the kind of farming that dominates in Canada. So agricultural emissions are estimated to have gone up about 8.2% since 2005. The other thing that's important to note are some of the fast facts that are listed on the other side of the slide, where the typical Canadian household spends about $1,750 each year on food that they will throw away. So that's not economically, just for household budgets, is not a great thing to, we want to try and discourage that and find ways of avoiding that. And then in Canada, the food waste that we throw away generates about 56.6 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions. And this is on an annual basis. So the point of this is that we don't need to be misusing resources. What we do need are sustainable regional food systems that recycle ecological and financial resources. So we keep things more local. The fourth myth is that we should not eat meat. This is a bit of a contentious one, and I'm happy to have a conversation about this if people would like to unpack this a bit. But basically, animals, in fact, can be part of a resilient circular food system as they convert grasses into proteins and fertilizers. So they do something that we can't do in terms of deriving energy from the sun, basically. So the problem, though, arises when we have large factory farms where tens or hundreds of thousands of animals eat highly processed food themselves, and then in turn produce toxic quantities of waste. That's where the problem lies. So we don't need these large-scale farms. What we do need is to eat animals graze sustainably on pastures that help to sequester carbon. So that can be part of a sustainable food cycle. or animals that are hunted from the land. We also need people who eat appropriate amounts of animal protein for their health and the planet. So while we can have meat as part of our diet, it should not be an excessive amount of meat. And also, what needs to be considered is how to divert the land that's currently being used for animal feed, which is not insignificant, into land for human food so people can eat a more plant-based diet in the end. So the question becomes, how can we do this? Well, the first thing that we can do is support ecologically grown food that's processed and distributed regionally. And there are policies and programs in the European Union and the United States around agroecology, public procurement, and all kinds of policies that I'm sure you're familiar with. We can also build on the lessons from COVID when people really did turn more to their regional food system than they had before. And an example of this is Open Food Network .ca that I've worked with over the years, and it's an online farmers market that really helped to connect producers with consumers during the time of COVID, and the demand for it spiked during the COVID period. We also need policies and financial tools to support regional food systems. So, for example, the effective bill that's just been proposed in the United States. So some of the tools that we can consider or encourage government to consider are things like investing in regional infrastructure, such as food hubs, through directed programs that support infrastructure and training that enables fair, green, healthy regional food supply chains, and also, as people have been saying, helps to fill in the missing middle. We can also have tools for government and impact investors that ensure that healthy food is affordable and green. One way that we can do that is to take current subsidies that are very significant for food that relies on fossil fuels and leads to unhealthy diets, and instead use those subsidies to support food that promotes health. Those are so sustainably produced meats, whole grains, pulses, vegetables, and fruits. And as Linda alluded to, switching from our current food system would pay huge dividends in the long run for our healthcare system as well. So this is sort of a future us benefit that we could realize. It's also important to support things like food policy councils at the regional scale, so communities can come together and decide what they want to do for themselves. It's really important. Food communities know what they need, or communities know what they need better than anyone else by and large. There's also an opportunity to fund a national school food program that feeds our kids and educates them about healthy eating following the Canada Food Guide. I think Quebec is a great example. The social economy investment model that they have there is really inspirational for me, at least. They have over 11,000 collective enterprises that generates nearly $50 billion in sales and employs over 220,000 people. And this sector is, the social economy is involved in all activities from retail to emerging technologies. So why do we need to do this? Well, first of all, it would set Canada up as an international beacon of change. So that wouldn't be a bad thing for us to be able to capitalize on. It would help us to meet our international commitments, for example, to the Sustainable Development Goals, the Global Biodiversity Framework, and climate change commitments. It also helps us to make positive investments in the future of Canada and Canadians. And finally, it allows us to spend resources in support of healthy people, healthy communities, and a healthy planet. So, for example, we can invest in the missing middle. And I think it's an exciting time. We're really at the beginning of this transformation, and I applaud all of you who are attending this conference for thinking about these things and doing something about it. So if you have any questions, that's my email address. I'd be happy to hear from anybody. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today.